I want to ask you one question. It's about weight. All over the world, there are stones that should not be where they are. Cut stones, fitted stones, stones weighing as much as a loaded freight train car, lifted into walls with joints so tight you can't slide paper into them. And everywhere, the people who lived beside those stones, when asked who put them there, gave the same answer. Not gods, not kings, not their own ancestors. Giants. In Denmark, in Lebanon, in Armenia, in Brittany, in the hill country of ancient Canaan, on Salisbury Plain, peoples with no contact, no shared language, no shared religion, all writing the same name into the caption under the same impossible stones. Last episode, I showed you that every culture on Earth remembers the same giant story. Tonight, I want to show you what those cultures said the giants did, because this time, the evidence isn't a story you have to take anyone's word for. This time, the evidence weighs 800 tons, and it's still there. This episode exists because of the comment section on the last one. I said the comments on this channel work as a research desk, and I meant it. Within a day of that video going up, someone pointed me to a journal article I'd never heard of. Not a mystery blog, a theology journal. The article is from 1938. The author is G. Ernest Wright, one of the founding figures of biblical archaeology, and the title is about as dry as titles get: Troglodytes and Giants in Palestine. And buried in that dusty paper is an observation that reorganized this entire episode for me. Wright puts two witnesses side by side. The first is Pausanias, a Greek geographer of the 2nd century, a travel writer, basically, walking the ruins of his own country's deep past. Pausanias reaches the ancient citadels of Mycenae and Tiryns, looks at their walls, boulders the size of wagons, stacked without mortar, and records, matter-of-factly, what the Greeks had always said. These walls were built by the Cyclopes, giants. To this day, archaeologists call that construction style Cyclopean masonry. The label never came off. The second witness is older. In the Book of Numbers, scouts are sent north into Canaan to survey the land, and they come back shaken. They report fortified cities, cities whose walls modern excavation confirms ran up to 18 feet thick, and they report the people who held them. The line they use is one of the most vivid in any ancient text. We seemed in our own eyes like grasshoppers, and so we seemed in their eyes. Like grasshoppers. Sit with that phrase, because I did. Two traditions, Greek and Hebrew, with no shared scripture and no shared masons, both stand in front of oversized stonework and both reach the same conclusion. Not our ancestors were stronger, not the gods did this. Specifically, a race of very large people built this, and they were here before us. Two witnesses who never met, one inference. And this is the episode where I stopped asking whether the inference was right and started asking why it was universal. Because once you know to look for it, the caption is everywhere. The medieval Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus looked at the dolmens scattered across his country, capstones the weight of small houses balanced on standing stones, and argued in writing that giants must have existed, because nothing else could account for the construction. In Armenia, folktales say the sun god Ari ordered a fallen race of giants to haul the stones of a mountain circle into place. Arab chroniclers wrote that the colossal first courses of Baalbek were raised after the Great Flood by a tribe of giants at the command of King Nimrod. Basque tradition credits giants with the endless stone rows of Carnac, and in Britain, the oldest recorded name for Stonehenge isn't Stonehenge at all. It's the Giants' Dance. Denmark, Armenia, Lebanon, France, Britain, Canaan, Greece. The biggest stones belong to the giants. Everywhere, without exception, I have been able to find. So tonight, 6 sites. At each one, the stone, the legend, the official explanation given its full day in court, and the specific point where, in my judgment, the arithmetic stops working.
Start where the documentation is thickest, the hill country of ancient Canaan. The scouts' report wasn't a one-off. The biblical record returns to these people again and again. the Anakim, the descendants of Anak, dwelling around Hebron, and modern scholarship has taken the reports seriously enough to argue about them in print for a century. In 2009, the biblical scholar Ronald Hendel, writing in Biblical Archaeology Review, laid out the mainstream position, and it's elegant, so let's give the official answer its full day in court. Hendel's argument runs like this. By the time Israelites moved through Canaan, the land was already full of ruins, old, abandoned cities from an earlier age, walled in cyclopean masonry. A people confronting 18-foot thick walls they couldn't imagine building would conclude, reasonably, that the original population had been giants, exactly as the Greeks concluded about Mycenae. The giants in this reading are an inference from architecture, ghost stories told by masonry. It's a genuinely good theory. It explains the Greek case and the Hebrew case with one mechanism. For years, I'd have stopped there. But read the scout report again. They don't describe ruins. They describe defended cities, powerful people, present tense, holding those walls. You don't feel like a grasshopper in front of an empty building. And the tradition insists these were not phantoms of the past. As late as the Wars of Joshua, the record claims men of the Anakim still held Hebron. Then there's Josephus, the Jewish historian writing under Rome in the 1st century, a man with a reputation to protect and access to records we no longer have. Josephus states two things that stop me cold. First, that in his own day, the 1st century, the bones of these giant men were still on display, still shown to visitors. He writes about it the way you'd mention a museum exhibit. And second, this. Josephus records that the ancient giants built two great pillars, one of stone, one of hard brick, engineered specifically so that at least one would survive the coming deluge. They built for an audience after the flood, because, and here's the line that connects this episode to the last one, the giants knew it was coming. If you watched the previous episode, you already met this idea. The Book of Enoch's giants warned of the water in advance. Here it is again, in a different author, in a different century, wearing engineering clothes. The giants of legend don't just build big. They build like people who have seen a forecast. And that's where the arithmetic stops working. The official theory explains why people inferred giants from walls. It does not explain why two separate traditions gave the same motive, the same warning, and the same deadline. Now come to the Bekaa Valley of eastern Lebanon, about 86 kilometers from Beirut, to a temple platform that has been embarrassing engineers for 2,000 years. Baalbek. The Romans built their grandest temple of Jupiter here, on a site so old the name of its first god is a matter of reconstruction. Baal, later merged into Zeus, later into Jupiter, at a settlement the Greeks called Heliopolis, City of the Sun. In 1898, a German expedition dug here and announced there was nothing older than Rome. That was the official position for decades. Then, a deep trench at the edge of the Jupiter platform came down on Neolithic artifacts, and the site's continuous settlement is now agreed to stretch back more than 9,000 years. The trench also produced something else, according to the researchers who have cataloged this site's stranger findings. Skeletal remains described as 3 individuals of unusually large stature. I flagged that claim as reported rather than established. The documentation trail on those bones is thinner than I'd like, and I've told you before, when the evidence is weak, I'll say so. But the stones are not weak evidence. The stones you can go and measure. The retaining wall on the western flank contains a course called the trilithon, 3 cut limestone blocks, each 19 meters long, over 4 meters high, nearly 4 meters deep, each one weighing roughly 800 tons. 800 tons per stone, lifted 6 meters up onto a wall and fitted. So let's give the official answer its full day in court, because Rome was magnificent at engineering and no one honest disputes it. Roman builders moved enormous columns with cranes, capstans, rollers, earthen ramps, and unlimited manpower. Scholars have proposed workable schemes for the trilithon along exactly those lines. It is not magic, it is not impossible, but 2 details keep the file open on my desk. First, in the quarry, less than a kilometer away, the builders left their homework behind. cut blocks even larger than the trilithon, one of over 1,000 tons, shaped, finished on multiple faces, and abandoned mid-move. Whoever was doing this wasn't at the edge of their ability with 800 tons. They were warming up. Second, the local tradition. Ancient Arab writers didn't credit Rome. They wrote that the first courses, the megalithic base, were older, raised after the Great Flood by a tribe of giants under King Nimrod, which means the people living beside the stones drew a line through the middle of the wall. The temple above, that men built. The platform below, that was here before. And quietly, the archaeology drew a line in the same place. Roman temple on top of a platform whose earliest construction phases are still debated in the literature. The legend and the trench disagree with the guidebook in the same direction. Stone doesn't care what we believe. It just sits there, 800 tons at a time, waiting for an explanation that covers it all. Quick, honest word, because it's literally how this episode got made. Last time I called the comment section a research desk, and you took me seriously. The right article that opens this video came from a viewer. So the deal continues. If this pattern is pulling at you the way it's been pulling at me, share this with the one person you know who feels that same pull. And if you live near any of these stones, Brittany, Armenia, Wiltshire, the Bekaa, I mean this. Go, look, photograph, and tell me what the guidebook version leaves out. That's how this kind of research works, and maybe that's exactly why so little of it gets done. Now, Armenia. On a rocky promontory near the town of Sisian in the mountains of southern Armenia, there is a scatter of more than 200 standing stones that the locals call Zorats Karas, and that researchers have taken to calling Karahunj, the Armenian Stonehenge. Here's what makes it unlike any other stone circle in Europe: the holes. Dozens of the monoliths have narrow channels drilled clean through them, angled, aimed at the horizon. Not decoration, apertures. You can put your eye to a hole cut by someone thousands of years ago and see the exact slice of sky they wanted you to see. Two Armenian researchers, Paris Harouni and Elma Parsamyan of the Burakan Observatory, spent years surveying those sightlines and concluded the site was a functioning observatory with several apertures tracking Deneb, the brightest star of the Cygnus constellation. And they argued for a founding date as early as 7,600 BCE, which if it held, would make this the oldest astronomical instrument standing anywhere on Earth. An Oxford astrophysicist, Mihran Ardanyan, later examined the site and split the difference. Certainly aligned to the sun and moon, he concluded, possibly to stars, and simultaneously a necropolis, a burial ground built as a bridge between Earth and sky. Now the official answer, in full. Mainstream archaeology dates Karahunj far later, Bronze Age, roughly 2000 BCE, and reads it primarily as a necropolis whose alignments may be incidental. The 7600 BCE date is not accepted. I want that on the record, plainly, because the dating fight is real and unresolved, and I'm not qualified to referee it. But here's what nobody disputes, and it's the reason this site is in this episode: the folktale. Old Armenian tradition, recorded independently of any dating controversy, says the sun god Ari commanded a fallen race of giants to carry the immense stones to this place and raise them. A fallen race, compelled to build, for the sun, at a site whose drilled stones, whatever their age, demonstrably watched the sky. The legend didn't just remember who built it, it remembered what the site was for. And the arithmetic of coincidence has to stretch again. The only stone circle in Europe with aiming holes is also the one whose legend describes its builders working on astronomical orders. Now the case I want to zoom all the way in on. One monument, one medieval fantasy, and the strangest vindication in modern archaeology. Around the year 1136, a Welsh cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote his History of the Kings of Britain, the book that gave the world King Arthur and Merlin, and in it, Geoffrey tells the story of Stonehenge. He calls it the Giant's Dance, a ring of healing stones, he says, originally erected far away in the west, across the water in Ireland, and brought to Salisbury Plain in a single astonishing operation. In his telling, 15,000 men failed to move the stones with rope and muscle, and it takes Merlin's arts to dismantle the ring, carry it over the sea, and reassemble it where it stands. For nearly 900 years, the official verdict on that story has been simple. Charming nonsense, medieval fanfiction. Stonehenge is local, prehistoric, and Merlin-free. So let's give the official answer its full day in court. Because on Merlin, obviously, the court rules against Geoffrey. But then, geology got involved. The great Sarsen uprights of Stonehenge are local, yes, but the smaller stones, the blue stones, the original monument stones, are not. Petrological analysis traced them to the Preseli Hills of West Wales, more than 200 kilometers away, west, across water and rough country, exactly the direction Geoffrey pointed 8 centuries before anyone could test him. He said Ireland, the true source, sits on the Irish Sea, in the landscape between Britain and Ireland that in Geoffrey's day was culturally Irish-facing. And then it got stranger. In 2021, a research team led by archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson published findings from a site called Wan Mon in those same Welsh hills, the remains of a dismantled stone circle. Empty sockets where monoliths once stood, one socket with a distinctive pentagonal footprint, matching, in cross-section, an actual blue stone standing at Stonehenge today. Their proposal, in a mainstream peer-reviewed journal, part of Stonehenge may have first been erected in Wales, taken down and moved, stone by stone, to Salisbury Plain. A ring of stones, raised in the west, dismantled, carried across the country, reassembled. That is Geoffrey's story with the magician removed. I'm not telling you Geoffrey had a secret source. Maybe he invented every word and the geology's a coincidence. But I'll say what I see. An 800-year-old account turned out to be directionally correct about the one detail nobody could have checked until the 20th century, that the Giants' dance came from somewhere else, and it came from the West, and the oldest name held all along. Not the King's Dance, not the Ancestors' Dance, the Giants' Dance. The biggest stones belong to the Giants, even in Britain, even in the founding book of British legend.
Cross the channel to Brittany, to the town of Carnac, and stand at the head of the largest concentration of megaliths in the world. Thousands of standing stones, marching in parallel rows across the countryside, kilometer after kilometer. Conservative estimates put the earliest of them at 5000 BCE, 7,000 years old, and possibly older. The researcher David Hatcher Childress, who has spent a career cataloging megalithic sites, calls it the greatest such concentration anywhere. The Basque peoples of the Franco-Spanish borderlands, themselves an anomaly, a population whose language has no known relative in Europe and whose genetic roots reach back tens of thousands of years, preserve traditions crediting the great stoneworks of Western Europe to giants. Again, you could have predicted it by now. But the detail that earns Carnac its place tonight is underwater. Walk the Morbihan coast at low tide, and you can watch stone rows walk into the sea. Standing stones, clearly part of the alignments, submerged, visible only when the water drops, drowned for the rest of the day. Childress notes that whole sections of the complex appear to have been built when the geography of Brittany was different, and on this point, mainstream science quietly agrees with him. Sea levels have risen since the Neolithic. The coastline was farther out. Those builders raised stones on dry land that the water later took. Which means Carnac is something remarkable. Physical, weighed out and touch it proof that megalith builders worked on land that a rising flood then swallowed. Now line that up with everything else in this episode. The Arab chroniclers, Baalbek's base was raised after the Great Flood. Josephus, the pillars were built to survive the flood. The Armenian giants, a fallen race, building in the aftermath of some catastrophe. Every version of the builder's legend positions them relative to the same event, the water. And at Carnac, the water is still there, holding the evidence. Twice a day it hands a piece back. Stone doesn't care what we believe. Which brings us to the question this whole episode has been holding at arm's length. Suppose, just as an exercise, you take the world's legends at their word.
You'd need a mechanism. How does a race of giants exist at all? People have tried to answer that, and I want to show you the strangest attempt on record, partly as history, partly as a warning about how badly this question can be answered. In 1929, a Viennese mining engineer named Hans Horbiger, with a school teacher co-author, published the theory that swept through interwar Europe, the Welteislehre, the World Ice Doctrine. Horbiger held that Earth had captured and lost a series of moons across its history, that the fall of the last moon before ours dragged the oceans into a monstrous girdling tide, drove civilizations into highlands like Tibet and the Andes, and in the era when a heavy moon hung low overhead, produced an age of giant life, giant plants, giant animals, giant men. His followers even coined a term for the world before our moon settled in, pre-lunar culture. Let me be completely clear about the official verdict, because this one isn't contested. The Welteislehre is wrong, demonstrably, thoroughly wrong, rejected in the physics in its own decade, and abandoned since for reasons both historical and, frankly, historical, given the political movements that later adopted it. I'm not reviving it. It matters tonight for exactly one reason. It shows that a century ago, serious-sounding Europeans found the giant question so persistent that they were willing to rebuild the sky to answer it. But there's a smaller, stranger thread in the same file, and this one I can't fully close. In 1902, the volcano Mont Pelée erupted on Martinique and annihilated the city of Saint-Pierre. A cloud of burning gas at 1,000 degrees, some 20,000 dead in minutes, a single survivor, famously protected by the walls of his prison cell. That much is documented history, among the deadliest eruptions ever recorded. But the researcher Peter Colosimo, writing in 1973, adds an epilogue that in the years after, life returned to the ash zone larger, plants, insects, animals of unusual size, and that two scientists studying the phenomenon, a Dr. Gravour and a Dr. Rouen, measuredly grew as grown men by 2 inches and more, which Colosimo attributes to intense radiation released from deep underground. I have to fence this one carefully. Colosimo cites records I have not been able to trace, and until someone traces them, that story stays in the reported, not established drawer. But the mechanism under it isn't fringe at all. It's textbook. Cosmic rays and other energy particles are one engine of evolutionary change. The astronomer Carl Sagan made exactly that point for a general audience, that mutations evolution selects from are struck in part by high-energy particles arriving from the depths of distant stars. Even Colosimo, to his credit, concludes that such radiation could not have created a race of giants on its own, only perhaps contributed. So the mechanism hunt ends where honest hunts sometimes do. Empty-handed. No theory survives. And I want you to notice what that means, because it cuts both ways. There is no accepted mechanism for a race of giants. And there's also no explanation for why the whole world insists there was one. Let me say something directly to you now, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from. I am not claiming giants quarried Baalbek or raised Carnac. I don't have the evidence for that, and tonight you've watched me mark every weak link in this chain on camera. The disputed bones in the Baalbek Trench, the rejected dating at Carnac, the untraceable doctors of Martinique. When a claim is thin, I've told you it's thin. Here is what I am claiming, and I'll stand on it. The official account that every one of these traditions independently invented giant builders as a naive explanation for old walls is inadequate to the record. It explains the walls. It does not explain why the legends agree on the details the walls don't show. The builders' relationship to a flood, their compulsion or foresight, their departure. And it cannot explain Stonehenge, where the naive legend encoded a fact about the stone's origin that archaeology needed 800 years and a petrology lab to confirm. Everything I've cited tonight is checkable. A 1938 journal article, a 2009 magazine essay by a mainstream biblical scholar, a 2021 peer-reviewed excavation report, Josephus in any library, and the stones themselves, which brings me to the last thing. Because this, again, is not a story about the past. The trilithon is in the wall right now. You can fly to Beirut, drive the Bekaa Road, and put your hand on 800 tons that somebody, at some point, for some reason, lifted. The 1,000-ton block is still lying in the quarry, mid-journey, exactly where its builders walked away from it, the world's heaviest unfinished sentence. The drilled stones of Carnac are still aimed. Tonight, while you watch this, their apertures are holding their slice of the Armenian sky, the way they have every night for at least 4,000 years, waiting for an eye. At Carnac, the tide went out twice today. Twice, the sea handed back the drowned rows and held them for a few hours and took them again. It will do it twice tomorrow. Nothing in this story is hidden. That's what I can't get past. No sealed vault, no missing archive. The evidence is the most public it could be, standing in open fields, holding up Roman temples, lining public beaches. It is so available that we've stopped seeing it. We've had the answer sheet lying open on the desk for the entire exam, and the one question nobody assigns anymore is the one every ancient culture answered in unison. The builders left, the stone stayed, waiting.